It's Movie Review Friday, and today we are talking about what is probably one of my favorite horror films.
Weird flick.
Of the 70s, if not of all time.
This movie scared the shit out of me as a kid.
It is very disturbing and creepy.
It's very, very odd and eerie. And this inspired many a Skinny Puppy song.
Right, yeah.
There's a lot of this movie, samples from this movie.
Of dialogue, yeah.
Of dialogue in Skinny Puppy. Many people will say The Shining is a classic horror.
Yeah, and I would agree with that.
I would agree with that. But I think The Tenant is probably the French version of The Shining. In other words, it's like a French horror masterpiece.
It has a lot of similar elements to it.
Yeah, weird music, weird story. You're not sure what you're seeing is real or not. You don't know if this is a ghost. You don't know if this is insanity. The story unfolds the way it wants to unfold. It's taking its time. It ratchets up pressure on you and the main character. And then it releases the pressure. And then it ratchets it back up again. And then it releases the pressure. So you're not sure if you and the main character are imagining this. Are you getting paranoid? You don't know. Yeah. Eventually, hell breaks loose.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, the Tenant is from 1976, famously directed by Roman Polanski. Now, this is the third film in his so-called apartment trilogy, which is not a trilogy in the true sense of the word in that it's like a single overarching story. It's just three movies that share a similar setting, a similar theme, things like that. The first two movies, of course, are Repulsion, which came out in 1966, I believe, and Rosemary's Baby, which came out in 1968. So all three of these movies, set in an apartment, all deal with paranoia, madness, of varying types. Repulsion was kind of about, starred Catherine Deneuve, and she was in her apartment, and it was kind of like an outward manifestation of her spiraling madness and her, kind of her weird sexual repression and stuff like that. Rosemary's Baby, using the apartment more as kind of like a womb metaphor, how her neighbors, who were the satanic cult, obviously, spoiler alert, right. who were kind of like invading her life, invading her womb, things of that nature. This one is kind of more, The Tenant is kind of more a meditation on loss of identity. Yeah. Little bit of xenophobia. Yeah. Things like that. It's interesting to me. This is actually based on a novel, which was called The Chimeric Tenant. And the novel, I haven't read it, but from other people who have read it and, kind of reading a breakdown of it, it seems the story is very similar. The tone is very similar to the movie. So it seems like Polanski did a pretty faithful adaptation of the book. Now, Roman Polanski, he chose to play the main character himself.
That was a good move because as creepy as that little dude is, especially, what we know about him now, that creepiness kind of moves backwards in time and infects this movie.
Yeah.
You look at him now and he's just a creepy man. Yeah. He's very creepy.
Right. But like I said, I think the reason that he specifically wanted to play the main character in this was because a lot of it sort of mirrored his own life. Yeah. I mean, he was a Polish Jew and living in under Nazi occupation. He had to hide out from Nazis. His parents were put in the concentration camps, and he moved from country to country. So there's a lot of stuff in this because the main character, who is only known as Trolkowski, he's never given a first name. Yeah. He is also a Polish immigrant. He's living in Paris. He is a French citizen. He makes great pains to tell people, but there's still something of everyone being sort of like hostile toward him because he's an outsider. He's a stranger. And so a lot of that kind of infuses this movie. So I think that's kind of why he wanted his own experience to mirror that of the character.
Yeah, and you're not sure whether or not the character's imagining this or if it's real. Too.
Yeah, and they never
resolve
it one way or the other, which is one of the things I really like about this movie. And there's a lot that I really like about this movie. Now, as much as I love Repulsion, I love Rosemary's Baby. I mean, Rosemary's Baby, those are also two of my favorite horror movies ever. I don't know if The Tenant is objectively a better film than Rosemary's Baby, but I would argue that it's a creepier film than Rosemary's Baby.
Oh, yeah, by far.
There's just something really... Even when this movie... Because like, this movie is very long. It's 2 hours.
Yeah.
And it's... Some people say, oh, it's kind of rambling or kind of slow, which I didn't really find. I find it very...
Disagree,
yeah, I find it very intriguing. It's very... You're kind of inside this guy's mind the whole time.
They're trying to endear this character to you, so you care about him. And he's trying to be normal, but this guy's going insane. The question is why?
Yeah.
Because he's going insane just like the tenant before him.
Yeah.
The one that was the girl that was there before.
Yeah.
And there's a bunch of little clues that make you wonder, is he under some kind of ghostly or attack? Is he coming under oppression or possession? What is it? Is he just going crazy? Is he imagining all this? And it's up to you to decide, because you never really find out.
Yeah.
But it's just a weird movie. And people know what body horror in movies about. This is like identity horror.
Yeah.
There's a real famous scene where Polanski's drunk, laying down on the back of his bed. He's got this beautiful woman trying to undress him and climb in bed with him. And he's going... And he starts rambling and philosophizing. He's like, once there was a man who lost his right arm, and, he asked that arm to be buried, and the authorities said no. And he goes, but, body parts are a part of us. But what happens if I cut off my arm? What do I see? Me and my arm? And he goes, what if I cut off both of my arm? What do I see? My arms and me?
Yeah.
And then he goes, you take out my stomach, my intestines. What do I see? I see me and my intestines. And then I cut off my head. What do I see? Do I say me and my head, or do I say me and my body? And he's just going on. What right does my head have to call itself me?
Yeah.
And I think that's really what this movie is about. What right do you have to call yourself you? And you'll see what I'm talking about when you see this movie, because this guy's losing his identity through the whole thing.
Yeah, like I don't want to give too much away, but you have to give a little bit away, just because there's so much stuff that I love in this movie. The whole theme. Now, Trelkovsky's character, even from the beginning, is portrayed as very timid. He's very mousy, and he's in contrast to like his workmates, in contrast to other people. He almost seems like, even though he's trying not to be a burden or a bother to anyone, it's almost like everyone around him is so loud and so obnoxious, and they see him as an imposition even when he's trying not to be.
Yeah.
So there's kind of a lot of that. A brief summary of the plot, he has moved to... I don't know if he lived in Paris before. They don't really say anything about his life before. They don't say why he's looking for an apartment. They don't say like what his specific job is. They show him at his office a couple times, but they don't say specifically. He's just some kind of office worker. And it's very Kafka-esque in that way. He's sort of like an everyman. He's almost like a blank slate, kind of. Mm-hmm. He's just this mousy, regular little guy. Now, at the beginning of the movie, he, for some reason, needs a new apartment. And he finds out through a relative that this one apartment in this building is vacant because its former tenant, Simone Schul, who is an Egyptologist, which kind of plays into some of the imagery later on, has attempted suicide by jumping out of the window of the apartment and crashing through the glass awning that's below. Yeah. Now, she didn't die immediately, so she's still in the hospital. Now, he kind of feels bad about taking the apartment because she's still alive.
But apartments are really hard to find.
But apartments are really hard to come by, even though they're asking like a ridiculous deposit for this, and it doesn't even have its own bathroom. You have to go down the hall and use a shared bathroom and stuff like that. But he really needs an apartment for whatever reason.
And he ends up in this apartment, this kind of creepy, broken down apartment with all this girl's stuff still in it.
All of her stuff is still in there.
And she ends up dying soon after. And he's living in this dead girl's apartment with all her stuff. And slowly he starts to realize that everyone around him is starting to slowly treat him as that girl. They start forcing her brand of cigarettes on him. They start forcing hot chocolate on him instead of coffee. They just do weird shit. And you don't know if he's imagining this or if the people in the environment are really ganging up on him to force him into the role of this girl.
Yeah.
You don't know.
The weird that it has like such, and also you should say too that that he's given her mail, like even after she's dead and stuff like that.
And this is just the beginning of it. It appears to be a big conspiracy to drive this fucker insane, or he believes it to be.
Or he believes it to be.
Right. But then there's other things that happen that seem like it possibly could be paranormal, or possibly hallucinations, or a mixture of them both. And maybe possession. You don't know. You don't know.
I mean, it could be read either way.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, I mean, obviously he was making a thematic statement about loss of identity. One of the hallmarks of Tsiolkovsky's character, besides him being, very quiet, very mousy, trying not to offend anyone and yet offending people anyway, because like all his neighbors are like complaining about him making noise even when he wasn't there. They complain about other tenants in the building who he never sees. It's all this really weird kind of shit. But another hallmark of his character is that he's constantly lying. Not in a way that
not in a malicious way.
Not in a malicious way. It's just kind of like it's almost to make things easier for him, easier for other people. Like he'll lie even when he doesn't have to. Right.
A good way to look at this movie is for those of you guys who've also taken advice to watch The Changeling. A changeling, it would be like an example of a realistic haunting of a house that's been inhabited by a very strong character, very strong-willed man who can confront the truth. That's what you have with The Changeling. This is kind of the opposite. This is kind of a weaker man in a creepy apartment who's doesn't have a strong sense of identity, and he's breaking down and going insane. This may be a haunting. This may be some kind of a weird possession, or it may just be insanity. You don't know because this guy really can't confront truth or reality, if you ask me.
Yeah.
It seems like that to me.
And I think the title of it, too, The Tenant obviously refers to Simone Schul, the previous tenant, refers to him, a tenant of the apartment. So not only does it refer to him being a physical tenant of an apartment, of a place, but he's also a metaphorical tenant in someone else's identity. Yeah. You know what I mean? So it's almost kind of like that, because I do think in a way, because I think even from the beginning, has some mental issues. Like I said, he doesn't have a particularly strong sense of self. Or a sense of identity of his own. It's like he doesn't really have any friends. He just hangs out with all these people who work with him who are nothing like him. They're all like obnoxious jerks. He just seems to.
He never stands up for himself.
He never stands up for himself. He's very, he's very people pleasing. He's always trying to be, which is why when he moves into this apartment and everyone seems initially rather hostile toward him or imposing on him, like, oh, take this hot chocolate. That's what she always used to have, or have this brand of cigarettes. We don't have the ones that you have, and or that you usually smoke. And he just kind of rolls with it. Yeah. But I think that's what kind of contributes to his, slow eroding away of his own personality, which he didn't have much of to start with. Yeah. So it's almost kind of like he takes up the mantle of this other woman's personality. And it's a really cool, like I said, I think it's interesting how the name of the book in French, the English translation of the French is actually The Chimeric Tenant. Right. It's not just The Tenant. Right. But so they're actually talking about some kind of hybrid identity switch. Yeah. And there's also kind of like a time loop going on as well. Yeah. Which is kind of interesting. And like I said, the Egyptology angle, I think that's the only angle that's actually not present in the book. But I think the reason that he added that to the movie was because the Egyptians had a particular belief that it's not so much like, because I was reading a review of this earlier and somebody made this point, which I really liked. They're like, it's not so much like Hinduism where it's, like reincarnation and stuff, but the Egyptians kind of believed that everything was happening all the time, like at once. And it was just this eternal kind of, everything happening. Right. And also they had that thing about taking body parts out and putting them in jars. Yeah. Which is kind of analogous to what he finds in his apartment wall. Okay. Yeah. So it's almost kind of like a magical like the parts of your body almost like as magical fetishes.
Right.
You know what I mean? So that kind of hints at a supernatural element. But like I said, the coolest thing about this is that it never specifies. It could be read as a guy going crazy because of what happened in the apartment before, like he's thinking about it too much and things like that. It could be read as a creepy conspiracy against him, analogous to that. It could also be read as a supernatural possession. The apartment itself might have some kind of, or the whole building might have some kind of sinister energy to it or something like that. It could really be read any of those ways, which I think is what makes it such a brilliant horror film and why it's so creepy.
It's a masterpiece, if you ask me.
I agree. And I think it has, even though there's elements of black humor in it, there's elements of camp in it almost. Yeah. But the creepy scenes, I mean, I saw this movie when I was pretty young, probably like a young teenager. And then I saw it again a couple years ago, and then we watched it again yesterday. And the scenes from this movie, there are several scenes from this movie which have really stuck with me over the years just because they are so unsettling. Yeah. You know what I mean? And I think I mentioned when I was talking about, when I did the review on David Lynch's Mulholland Drive, scenes like that, this kind of like weird identity switching, like displacement type of things, like I'm over here, I'm over there, like who am I and stuff. Yeah. Scenes like that have always really, really creeped me out. And I'm not entirely sure why that is. Like, I wrote a big, long essay on my blog.
I think David Lynch was inspired by this movie, actually.
Well, I don't know if he was so much inspired by this. He was probably inspired more by Ingmar Bergman and, some earlier stuff. Some early stuff, right. With the whole, because Ingmar Bergman did like Persona and stuff like that about, switching identities and losing sense of self and stuff. So it's kind of, in surrealism, it's a pretty common through line, as a theme in particular movies. And I think that was just something that he picked up on. But it's the same kind of thing here. But this one, like I said, I think it's cool that the three movies in this trilogy, they kind of take this theme of paranoia and stuff like that, but they do different shit with it. Yeah. And this one, like I said, kind of focuses mostly on loss of identity, but also on how society imposes its will on you or makes you conform to it. Yeah. There's a lot of that going on in this too. Not just because he's a foreigner, like living in a country that isn't his own and he feels like an outsider and people make him feel like an outsider, but also, in a sense, because they're trying to get him to adhere to their rules, which in a way he's not able to adhere to them, even though he tries. Right. And I think that's one of the things that kind of causes his mind to start to unravel. And, he starts to associate more and more with the woman who lived in the apartment before, who, and I have seen this suggested more than one place, might have been similarly persecuted because she was also, quote unquote, nonconformist because she was a lesbian. Right. So he's trying to make the point that society is going to try to like hammer you into this little box, and it could drive you crazy, because even if you try, they're still not going to let you.
I remember seeing it as a kid, and it just wigged me out because it was difficult to, I was kind of losing my sense of realism with the movie. Like, what was real? Was this guy, is he imagining this? Is this really happening? Some things seem like it's really happening. Yeah. Other things don't really, it's not as weird to say like Eraserhead by any means. Right. Kind of more along the lines of The Shining. Kinda.
It is kind of similar, like thematically similar.
Similar to that.
And I like that he doesn't really make a distinction between reality and fantasy. Yeah. Everything is kind of shot the same. So you don't really get a sense of, oh, he's just imagining this part. It could be. And it does seem, even from very early in the movie, I mean, for the first like 45, 50 minutes of this movie, I'm going to say it almost doesn't even seem like a horror movie. I mean, there's a couple little creepy things that happen.
Yeah, it doesn't play the horror movie game.
No, not really.
No. It does it on its own terms.
Yeah, it's usually termed as a psychological thriller, which I guess is the closest approximation of what its genre is. But I found a lot of the imagery that comes around later in the movie, particularly after Simone dies in the hospital, a lot of the stuff that he sees is just like really really unnerving.
Yeah.
I find, and the way it's shot is very unnerving. And even like the apartment and the apartment building itself almost becomes like a character in itself. It's kind of grimy and run down and shit like that. So I think that really helps in giving this like a really creepy feel.
Yeah.
And it's definitely one of my favorite horror movies, and one of the ones that creeped me out the most, like, and had the most imagery that stuck in my head over the years.
Yeah, I was able to get it on DVD. I think it was only $5. Actually, it was a brand new one. I think it was $5.
Yeah.
You can't get it on Blu-ray.
Yeah, weirdly, it hasn't been released on Blu-ray. I wonder why.
I don't know if you can see it on YouTube or not. Maybe Daily Motion.
I think I watched it on YouTube, but that was many years ago. So it might have been taken down by now.
Right. I would check Daily Motion or just buy the DVD. It's worth it. You'll like it.
It's not as well known as Rosemary's Baby, so it's not as easily available, but you might be able to find a free one somewhere, and DVDs are fairly cheap. But like I said, I don't think it's had a Blu-ray
It's a French
release.
movie. It's in English. Some of the people are dubbed in it, but Polanski, he does it in his
Most
own
of the
voice.
people are dubbed.
Yeah.
Because Isabella Johnny is in this, and I'm pretty sure that is not her voice.
Okay.
Yeah. This was actually one of her early films. This is before she did Nosferatu and Possession and all those that she's better known for. Okay. But she's in this, although she's almost unrecognizable with those glasses on, I gotta say. So that'll do it for this latest movie review. Remember, if you like the show, like, share, subscribe on all your social media. And if you'd like to support the show, remember to go to our Patreon page at patreon.com/13o'clock, or go to our blog, which is 13o'clockpodcast.wordpress.com. And there is a link in the sidebar to a PayPal account if you'd like to give a one-time donation. And remember to tune in for our regular episodes every Tuesday and our movie reviews every Friday. And until next time, bye.
Take out my stomach, my kidneys, assuming they were possible. I say me and my intestines.